Lexington, North Carolina, a small town nestled in the rolling hills of the Piedmont, where the scent of slow smoked barbecue drifts through quiet streets and neighbors still wave to one another from their front porches. Davidson County. The heart of the Carolina Furniture Belt, a place where generations of families built their lives around the steady rhythm of honest labor, where the textile mills hummed their mechanical lullabies from dawn until dusk, where the deep roots of community ran as thick as the red clay beneath the soil. In 1987, Lexington was home to roughly 16,000 souls. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked at night, where children rode their bicycles down shaded avenues until the streetlights flickered on, and where the very idea of violent crime felt like something that belonged to Charlotte or Raleigh, to the bigger, harder cities that lay beyond the county line. Everybody knew everybody. Your business was your neighbor's business, and that was just the way things were. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe. Or so they believed. But beneath that tranquil surface, something terrible was about to shatter the illusion of safety that this community held so dear. Mary Frances Mathis Davis was 29 years old. She was a mother of two, a woman whose life was woven into the fabric of this close-knit community. Those who knew Mary described her warmth, her quiet strength, and her unwavering devotion to the people she loved. She was not a woman who sought the spotlight or craved attention. She was steady. She was reliable. She was the kind of person you could count on, the kind of person who showed up, who did the work, who held things together when the world tried to pull them apart. Mary worked at Lanier's Ace Hardware store in Lexington, a modest job in a modest town, the kind of steady, honest work that kept food on the table and a roof overhead. It was not glamorous, but it was hers. She went to work, she came home, she took care of her family. That was her world, and she moved through it with grace and purpose. Her husband Richard, her children, her sister Lisa, her niece Lori, they all orbited around Mary like she was the gravitational center of their small universe. She was the kind of person whose absence would leave a void that could never truly be filled. The kind of person the world cannot afford to lose. And yet, lose her they would. On the morning of May 30th, 1987, Mary kissed her family goodbye and headed to work at the hardware store, just as she had done countless times before. It was a Saturday, the kind of late spring day when the North Carolina sun hangs high and the humidity begins its slow, suffocating creep across the landscape. Richard left to go swimming at his sister's house, expecting Mary to be home by the time he returned. It was an ordinary day, unremarkable in every way. Until it wasn't. Mary worked her morning shift without incident. The hardware store was busy in the way that small-town stores get busy on Saturdays. A steady trickle of customers looking for garden hoses, light bulbs, bags of fertilizer for their lawns. Mary helped them all with the same quiet competence she brought to everything she did. But when lunchtime came, she stepped away from the register, walked out the front door, and never came back. Her coworkers waited. At first, nobody thought much of it. People run late. People get caught up in errands. But the minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. Calls were made. Questions were asked. No one had seen where she went. No one had seen her leave with anyone. No one had heard a scream, a struggle, a commotion of any kind. She had simply vanished into the warm Carolina afternoon like smoke dissolving into the sky. One moment she was there, and the next she was gone, leaving behind nothing but an empty register and a growing sense of dread. Her husband Richard returned home from swimming to find the house empty. He expected Mary to be there, waiting, perhaps preparing dinner, perhaps resting after a long morning on her feet. Instead, there was only silence. The kind of silence that presses against your chest and whispers that something is terribly, irrevocably wrong. Richard called the hardware store. Mary had left for lunch and never returned. His heart sank. He called the police. The Lexington Police Department launched a search immediately. Patrol cars rolled through the neighborhoods with their windows down. Officers fanned out across the small town on foot, knocking on doors, checking the streets, scanning the parking lots, the alleyways, the vacant lots overgrown with weeds and kudzu. They checked the hospital. They checked the bus station. They checked every place a missing person might turn up in a town this size. In a community like Lexington, word traveled fast, faster than any police bulletin. By nightfall, friends and family had joined the search, their voices calling out Mary's name into the gathering dusk, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like desperate prayers made visible. But the night came and went with no answers. The town held its breath, and silence that followed was deafening. Then, on May 31st, the day after Mary disappeared, investigators made a discovery that would haunt this community for decades to come. Behind 802 East Center Street, in the shadow of the Winn-Dixie grocery store, they found the body of Mary Davis. She had been strangled. The medical examination would reveal an even more horrifying truth. Mary had been sexually assaulted before she was killed. She had been taken from the world in the most violent, degrading manner imaginable, discarded behind a grocery store like she was nothing. But Mary Davis was not nothing. She was a mother. She was a wife. She was a daughter and a sister and an aunt. She was everything to the people who loved her. The location where Mary was found was approximately a 20-minute walk from Lanier's Hardware, the store where she had been working that morning. Somewhere in that short distance between her workplace and the back of the Winn-Dixie, Mary had encountered her killer. Whether she was lured, whether she was grabbed, whether she went willingly with someone she recognized, those details remained maddeningly unclear. What was clear was that someone had committed an act of unspeakable violence against a young mother in broad daylight, in the heart of a small town where everyone supposedly knew everyone. The Lexington Police Department threw everything they had at the case. Detectives canvassed the area, interviewed witnesses, and collected physical evidence from the crime scene. In 1987, DNA technology was still in its infancy. The forensic tools available to investigators were primitive compared to what would come later. But the detectives working Mary's case had the foresight, the wisdom, to carefully preserve every piece of evidence they collected. They bagged it, tagged it, and locked it away, not knowing that their diligence would prove critical decades later. As Police Chief Robbie Rummage would later reflect, the wisdom of collecting that evidence was the reason justice would eventually be served. But in 1987, justice remained elusive. The investigation produced a list of potential suspects, but none could be definitively linked to the crime. One name surfaced during the inquiry, a local man named Russell Grant Wood. Wood was 32 years old at the time and lived right there in Lexington. According to police, Wood and Mary were not strangers to one another, though the exact nature of their relationship was never made entirely clear. Wood was looked at, questioned perhaps, but the evidence simply was not sufficient to bring charges against him or anyone else. The case went cold, and so it remained. The case file gathered dust on a shelf, reopened occasionally when a new detective inherited it, or when a tip came in from someone who claimed to know something. But the tips led nowhere. The leads dried up. The witnesses moved away or forgot or simply stopped talking. The trail, whatever trail there had been, went cold as the Carolina winter. Months turned into years. Years turned into decades. The world outside Lexington changed in ways that would have been unimaginable in 1987. The Berlin Wall fell. The Soviet Union collapsed. The internet was born, transforming the way human beings communicated and connected. Cell phones went from luxury items to necessities carried in every pocket. Wars were fought and ended. Presidents came and went. The furniture mills that had sustained Lexington for generations began to close, one by one, as manufacturing shifted overseas. The town changed. The people changed. And through it all, the murder of Mary Davis remained an open wound in the collective memory of this small North Carolina town. A wound that refused to heal, because no one had ever been held accountable for inflicting it. For Mary's family, time did not heal. It only deepened the ache. Her daughter, Tracy, grew up without her mother, carrying the weight of an unimaginable loss through every milestone, every birthday, every moment that should have been shared. Her husband, Richard, lived with the memory of that last ordinary morning, the last time he saw his wife alive, replaying it in his mind like a loop that never ends. Her sister, Lisa, her niece, Lori, they all carried their grief in different ways, but they carried it together, united by the hope that someday, somehow, the truth would emerge from the shadows. The Lexington Police Department never officially closed the case. Detectives came and went, retiring, transferring, moving on with their careers and their lives, but the file on Mary Davis remained active. New eyes would review the evidence periodically, looking for something that might have been missed, some thread that might be pulled to unravel the mystery. But for years, there was nothing. The evidence sat in storage, silent and patient, waiting for science to catch up with the crime. That moment finally arrived in 2022, more than 35 years after Mary's murder. The field of forensic science had undergone a revolution in the intervening decades. What had once required large samples of biological material could now be accomplished with microscopic traces. What had once taken months of laboratory work could now be completed in weeks. The science of DNA analysis had advanced so far, so fast, that cases once considered permanently unsolvable were being cracked open across the country. Cold case units in police departments from coast to coast were dusting off old evidence boxes and sending forgotten samples to laboratories equipped with technology that would have seemed like magic in 1987. And the Lexington Police Department, under the leadership of Chief Robbie Rummage, made the decision to do the same. They retrieved the preserved evidence from the Mary Davis case, evidence that had been sitting in storage for 35 years, and resubmitted it to the North Carolina State Crime Lab for re-examination with modern tools. The State Crime Lab, working in conjunction with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, recognized that the evidence held promise. The DNA material was then forwarded to Othram Incorporated, a cutting-edge forensic laboratory specializing in what they call forensic-grade genome sequencing. Othram scientists went to work, extracting and analyzing genetic material that had been waiting in evidence storage for over 3 decades. From those microscopic traces of biological evidence, they built a comprehensive genealogical profile of the unknown male suspect. Othram's in-house genealogical team then used that profile to construct a family tree, tracing genetic connections through public databases and genealogical records. Branch by branch, name by name, the tree took shape. And at the end of one of those branches, investigators found the name they had been searching for all along. Russell Grant Wood, the same man whose name had surfaced during the original investigation in 1987, the man who had been looked at but never charged, the man who had lived out the rest of his life in Lexington, walking the same streets as Mary's grieving family. But there was a cruel twist to this breakthrough, the kind of bitter irony that seems to haunt cold cases with an almost malicious persistence. Russell Grant Wood had died in 2013 at the age of 58. He had been dead for nearly a decade by the time science finally caught up with him. He would never sit in a defendant's chair. He would never hear the charges read against him in a packed courtroom. He would never feel the weight of a jury's gaze or face the eyes of Mary's family across a crowded gallery. He had lived for 26 years after the murder, walking freely through the same streets as Mary's grieving children, eating at the same restaurants, shopping at the same stores. And then he had died, taking his secrets and his silence with him to the grave, never once having been held accountable for what he had done on that May afternoon. Despite Wood's death, the legal system sought to deliver what measure of justice it could. District Attorney Gary Frank reviewed all of the relevant evidence, the DNA results, the genealogical analysis, the original case files. After his review, Frank issued an official letter stating unequivocally that if Russell Grant Wood were alive, the state of North Carolina would proceed with indictments on 3 charges: first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, and first-degree rape. It was a formal declaration of guilt, even if it could never lead to a conviction in a court of law. On February 3, 2023, investigators reached out to Mary's family to inform them that there had been new developments in the case. 3 days later, on February 6, detectives sat down with the family and shared the full details of what had been discovered. For the first time in 36 years, they had answers. The man who had taken Mary from them had a name. He had a face. He was someone she had known. The family's reaction was a complex tapestry of relief, grief, and a sorrow that defied simple categorization. Mary's niece, Lori Martin, spoke for many of them when she said, "We prayed that one day we would find the person who violently murdered our beloved Mary. We now have some answers." Although that won't bring Mary back, it does give us a sense of closure. At the press conference announcing the resolution of the case, Mary's daughter, Tracy Cleary, read a memorial poem she had written for her mother. Her words carried the weight of a lifetime without the woman who had given her life, expressing love that had never dimmed and the hope that they would one day be reunited. It was a moment of raw, unguarded emotion that reminded everyone in the room that behind the DNA evidence and the legal proceedings, there was a human being who had been loved deeply and lost too soon. The family planned a celebration of Mary's life for February 12th, what would have been her 65th birthday. It was a chance to honor not just her memory, but the long road they had traveled to reach this moment of partial resolution. Chief Rummage addressed the lingering questions that the investigation could not answer. When asked about the motive behind the killing, he was candid. Determining motive, he said, would be nothing but conjecture. He confirmed that Wood and Mary knew each other, but declined to speculate further on the nature of their relationship. Some mysteries, it seemed, would remain forever buried with the man who committed the crime. The case of Mary Davis stands as both a tragedy and a testament. It is a tragedy in the deepest, most gut-wrenching sense of the word. A young mother was taken from her family in an act of senseless, predatory violence. Her children grew up without her. Her husband was left to carry on alone. And the man who did it, the man who strangled the life out of her and left her behind a grocery store, lived out his remaining years in the same small town, breathing the same air, walking under the same sky without facing a single consequence for what he had done. But it is also a testament to the investigators who worked this case across the span of nearly 4 decades, from the original detectives in 1987 who had the wisdom to preserve every scrap of evidence, to the modern forensic scientists at Othram who coaxed a killer's identity from microscopic traces of degraded DNA. They never gave up. They never closed the file. They never told Mary's family that there was no hope. They preserved the evidence. They kept the case open. They embraced new technology when it became available. And in the end, after 36 long years, they gave a grieving family something that had been denied to them for more than 3 decades: the truth. Lexington, North Carolina, still sits quietly in the Piedmont Hills. The Winn-Dixie, where Mary's body was found, is long gone, replaced by the slow march of time and progress. But the memory of Mary Frances Mathis Davis endures. She endures in the hearts of her children, now grown. She endures in the prayers of a family that never stopped seeking answers. And she endures as a reminder that in the pursuit of justice, patience and perseverance are not just virtues. They are necessities. Some cases are solved in hours. Some take days or weeks. And some, like the killing of Mary Davis, take 36 years. But the passage of time does not diminish the value of the truth. If anything, it magnifies it. Because every year that passed without answers was a year that Mary's family lived in the shadow of the unknown, haunted by questions that had no answers and a grief that had no resolution. Russell Grant Wood may have escaped the courtroom, but he did not escape identification. His name is now forever linked to the crime he committed on that May afternoon in 1987. And while that may not be justice in the fullest sense of the word, it is something. It is acknowledgement. It is accountability, however incomplete. And for a family that waited 36 years for the truth, it is enough. It has to be. Mary Davis was 29 years old when she was taken from this world. She should have had decades more. Decades of watching her children grow, of holding grandchildren, of sitting on her front porch on warm Carolina evenings and listening to the crickets sing. All of that was stolen from her on a Saturday afternoon in May by a man who lived 3 more decades without remorse, without confession, and without consequence. But the truth has a way of surfacing. It may take months. It may take years. It may take 36 years and a revolution in forensic science. But it surfaces. And when it does, it carries with it a power that transcends the limitations of the legal system. Because even when the courtroom cannot deliver its verdict, the truth speaks for itself. It names the guilty. It vindicates the innocent. And it tells the world that the victim mattered, that their life had value, that their death was not forgotten. Rest in peace, Mary Davis. You are not forgotten.